You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Elaine de Kooning. Well, I guess technically, if you're looking at the cover art for this episode, you're looking at Elaine de Kooning's portrait of JFK, but we'll get to that later. Elaine Marie Catherine Fried was born March 12, 1918, in New York City. Her mother, Mary Ellen O'Brien Fried, encouraged Elaine and her siblings to draw, taking them to the museum and decorating their home with paintings. Elaine was hooked on art from a young age, constantly drawing and sketching. After high school, Elaine knew she wanted to be an artist. She studied briefly at the Leonardo da Vinci Art School and the American Artists School in New York. And it was in 1938, at the age of 20, that she met someone who would profoundly shape her life and her art. I'm talking about Willem de Kooning. By that point, when they had met, Willem was already an established artist. He was also quite a bit older than Elaine, about 14 years older, and he was a major figure emerging in the New York art scene. He became her teacher, her mentor, and eventually her husband. They married in 1943, and their relationship was, well, let's call it intense and complicated. They were deeply connected artistically, constantly discussing art, critiquing each other's work, pushing each other forward. Willem admired Elaine's natural talent and quick intellect, and she learned enormously from his technical skill and dedication. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. They were both passionate, independent people living in a very bohemian, freewheeling environment. Their marriage was unconventional, marked by periods of separation, affairs on both sides, and struggles, particularly with Willem's later alcoholism. But through it all, there remained a deep bond of mutual respect and artistic understanding. They separated in the late 1950s, but never actually divorced, eventually reconciling and living together again in the late 1970s until Willem's health declined. It's crucial to remember, though, Elaine wasn't just Mrs. de Kooning. She was a formidable artist in her own right, forging her own identity. She was a vital part of the Abstract Expressionist scene. She was incredibly social, intelligent, and articulate, making their loft the hub for artists like Jackson Pollock, Franz Kline, Arshile Gorky, and critics like Harold Rosenberg. And in addition to the painting, she was also writing. Starting in 1948, she became an editorial associate and writer for the influential magazine Art News. And this was huge. It gave her a platform to champion the new American painting, explaining the complex ideas in accessible ways, and to shape the conversation around modern art. And having to write about art also helped to clarify her own thinking and her own vision. So let's move on to her art. She was deeply influenced by the energy and gesture of abstract expressionism, that sense of movement and spontaneous brushwork. Elaine primarily focused on something many other AbEx artists avoided: portraiture. She brought the dynamic energy of action painting to the figure. She wasn't interested in creating stiff photographic likenesses. She wanted to capture the essence, energy, the presence of her subjects. Those subjects often included family, friends, fellow artists, and, as we'll talk about later, even the president, John F. Kennedy. And while most artists would have a model sit perfectly still to capture likeness, de Kooning would have the model moving around so she could capture their energy, allowing them to be themselves while she worked rapidly sketching and painting. Her brushstrokes were often visible, enigmatic slashes and swirls of color. The figures seem fragmented or maybe unfinished, but they feel alive, caught in the moment. She famously said, quote, "I'm more interested in character than style. Character comes out of the work. Style is applied or imposed on it, end quote. Now, as if painting and writing weren't enough, Elaine was also a dedicated and influential teacher. She held positions at prestigious institutions, including Yale University, Pratt Institute, Carnegie Mellon, Cooper Union, the University of Georgia, among others. She was known for being an inspiring but also challenging educator, pushing her students to find their own voices. Now, in the late 1950s, as she was separating from Elaine de Kooning, she traveled to Mexico, and this inspired a series of vibrant, powerful paintings based on bullfights, capturing the drama and intense movement with vivid colors and frenetic brushstrokes. Later, she traveled to France, and that led to her Bacchus series, inspired by garden sculptures full of swirling, joyous energy and light. Elaine de Kooning was known for her wit and intelligence, her generosity, and just boundless energy. She continued painting, writing, and teaching throughout her life, constantly exploring and evolving until she passed away of lung cancer in 1989, leaving behind a rich legacy as a key figure in American art, not just as a painter, but also a thinker, a writer, an educator who helped to define an era. Now, after a short break, I want to take a closer look at her portrait of John F. Kennedy. Welcome back. Today we're looking at Elaine de Kooning, and I thought, what better work to discuss than one of her most famous paintings, her portrait of, obviously, one of her most famous subjects, John F. Kennedy, the former president. In late 1962, Elaine received a major commission from the Harry S. Truman Library in Independence, Missouri, to paint the official portrait of the current president, John F. Kennedy. I can only imagine the excitement, but also the pressure. Painting a sitting president is just huge. So Elaine immediately was struck by JFK himself. She spent time sketching him during the winter of 1962 and 63 at the Kennedy family's winter home in Palm Beach, Florida. She found him incredibly restless, constantly in motion, pacing, talking, gesturing. He rarely sat still, but this was perfectly suited to Elaine's style. She wasn't interested in a static pose. She wanted to capture that dynamic energy, the charisma, that sense of vitality that she observed. She described him as incandescent, radiating light. Her process was intense. She didn't just do like one sketch and paint. She created dozens and dozens of drawings and paintings, trying to capture him from different angles in different moments. She worked really fast using charcoal, ink, pencil, oil paint, trying to keep up with his energy and her own impressions. She wasn't aiming for photographic accuracy, as you can see in the final work, but rather trying to grasp the totality of him through multiple attempts. Now, let's look at the resulting painting. A large oil painting now housed in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., which she worked on throughout 1963. The first thing you see is just the energy. It's not your standard stiff, formal presidential portrait. It is abstract expressionism meeting portraiture. The figure of Kennedy dominates the canvas, but he seems constructed from these enigmatic brushstrokes rather than precise lines. He's sitting, maybe leaning forward a little bit, but there's no stillness. The colors, these vibrant greens, yellows, and blues, contrast sharply with stark areas of black and white. The colors aren't necessarily realistic. They're chosen to convey the mood and the energy. Along similar lines, the brushwork is incredibly varied. We see a lot of quick slashes, thick dabs of paint, that heavy impasto, but also some thinner washes, jagged lines. It's all movement, action. We see the process laid out in front of us. The background is barely defined. It dissolves into abstract strokes of color, pushing the focus entirely onto the figure. The figure itself is sort of fragmented. We see parts of the body seeming to merge with the background, or they're defined by just a few brushstrokes. His face doesn't really have much detail. Instead, she captures his posture, the slope of the shoulders, that sense that he's maybe thinking, about to take action. It feels almost like he could leap out of the chair at any moment. Now, I think this portrait becomes all the more poignant when we put it in a broader historical context, thinking of Elaine de Kooning making this portrait of John F. Kennedy, capturing his intense and vital spirit. She was still working on that portrait when President Kennedy was assassinated in November of 1963. Just imagine the emotional impact. She was devastated and reportedly stopped painting for nearly a year afterwards. But of course, she would need to come back to it because it was not only a nice painting, it was something that captured Kennedy's vibrant energy, but also maybe the turbulence of the presidency and that era. The fragmented, almost explosive style reflects the fast pace and high stakes of his time in office. After his death, the unfinished quality takes on this ghostly character. I mean, he's seeming to fade into the background right before our eyes, dissolving into the paint. It takes on a new poignant meaning when we consider this not a portrait of the sitting president as it was when she started, but a memorial to a president who was tragically taken out in his prime. The significance of this piece is multi-layered. It's significant because it's a presidential commission tackled with that bold, modern Abex style. I mean, it was radical for the time. It also cemented Elaine de Kooning's reputation as a master portraitist who would capture psychological depth and physical energy, not just the surface likeness. And of course, as I said, it became intertwined with that heartbreaking moment in American history. It remains one of her most recognized and powerful works, a testament to both her unique artistic vision and the compelling, restless energy of the subject. Elaine de Kooning showed us that abstract expressionism wasn't just about splatters and drips. It could be a powerful tool for not just working a mood, but connecting it to the human figure. She balanced energy with observation, abstraction with representation, a portrait of a president filled with youth, energy, and vitality that could also come to serve as a beautiful yet haunting memorial.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.